Hey, Kurtis.
Hi, Deidra.
I did have Elena type up some questions because I was curious, but also this is a space for you to lead.
I love that.
But I wanted to know, like, why did you decide to do a podcast about financial literacy?
It's a good question. I think that a couple reasons. The first is this is the media format that is really easy to consume and is so widely consumed in our day-to-day, especially since the pandemic. I think podcasts have really taken off. And it's also a really short format where you can kind of get a piece of info that you want and skip over ones that you maybe know or aren't as interested in, and then zone in on topics that are more interesting to you. And it's also cheap, right? To get information out, much cheaper versus having to sit in front of a screen and watch. But you can just do it on your commute, or you can do it on your run, or when you're walking the dog, and learn something about either a murder mystery or about financial literacy, just whatever mood you're in for that night.
Yeah, very two extremes. Yeah, it definitely increases the accessibility for sure.
Yeah, and it just seems like they're the thing now, right? It's like you should probably be on TikTok doing a 10-second video about financial literacy, and then also a podcast about financial literacy. And then you're checking those boxes where people are consuming media. Yeah.
What is financial literacy? Like, in your experience or definition?
That's a good question. Financial literacy will differ from person to person, but it's the idea of becoming financially sound in an area that you're interested in or passionate about for your life. And so it's kind of like the question of what is wealth? That differs from person to person. And I ask that a lot in our financial coaching for what is wealth to you. And for someone, they might say, oh, it's having a sports car, or having my house paid off, or being able to retire at 60. And for others, it might be it's having a house on Lake Coeur d'Alene, or it's for one I just heard the other day, which I really like, is it's getting to the checkout stand and not worrying if my card's going to be declined. No matter if it's a $10 purchase or a $500 purchase, it's just knowing I don't have that thought or fear come across my mind when I'm next in line to pay. And I thought that was pretty powerful, but also shows that the idea of wealth is very different from person to person. And same thing with financial literacy, because you may have grown up in a household that has that as a topic of conversation, where maybe it's more normalized about what debt is, what credit cards are, what a checking account and savings account is, and the benefits and cons to all of those things. And you may have grown up in a household where none of those were conversations happening, and you kind of had to learn by trial and error, learn by fire in your early adulthood or formative adult years, where that can be really damaging to someone's financial journey if you're starting down a leg on that information, because you might make some challenges in your credit early on. And then when you go to make that first big purchase at 23, 24, you might be at a disadvantage. And so financial literacy also might mean just learning the basics.
Yeah. How do you, because you teach financial literacy in different places, yeah?
Yeah.
About how many different places?
I think we're in just the Spokane region, we're probably in about 22 different organizations that we teach in. And 3 or 4 of those are for-profit organizations. And then the majority, those 16, 18, or 20 are either nonprofit or not-for-profit organizations. And then this last year, we've had a really big focus on translated workshops too. And so we've been able to go into these really unique spaces where we're working with a translator and trying to provide financial literacy about topics that are interesting to or applicable to different groups of folks, and trying to just get that baseline of information, because moving to a new country can be really overwhelming and stressful as it is, but then also learning the U.S. financial system and economics. I mean, we have people that get their PhDs in it and they still are learning something new every day. So it's a very overwhelming and confusing system compared to most of the other economies out there.
Yeah. How do you differentiate? Did you call it financial wealth, or what's your definition of financial wealth, right? How do you, so if you're have a room full of people that you're teaching these skills to, and I don't know, varying topics, I'm assuming that we can get into, but how do you differentiate to those people that have the goal of, I want to get to the checkout stand and not stress about when I, put my card through, or I want a house on Lake Coeur d'Alene. How do you manage that room?
It kind of boils down to, you get into your why, right? About what's your savings why, what's your spending why. And it boils down to be a pretty similar formula or equation or practice for the same person that wants their lake house versus the same person that doesn't want to stress when they get to the checkout stand. And it's similar to one of my passions is just learning about fitness. And it's a very similar practice for that, right? You could have someone that's an elite bodybuilder, and you could have someone that is trying to lose weight for the first time in their life. And it's going to be a similar, their bodies are going to work in a very similar manner. You have to have a caloric deficit if you want to lose weight, and you have to have enough protein and lift if you want to build muscle. And you can fine tune it based off of the person, but the 30,000 foot level is the same. And so same practices apply in money. If you want to save money, we have to reduce our spending or bring in more money. And if we want to make a big purchase or a small purchase, we have to say no to a couple potential purchases throughout the week, month, or year. And the bigger that why, the bigger that purchase, the more things we have to say no to, the more essentially we have to delay our instant gratification for a purchase to get to that why, whether that's at the checkout stand at Trader Joe's or Costco, or it's at the closing of your house, right? And so same formula will apply. It's just the timeline might be different. And then those minute practices day to day from that person might be different. But overarching premises is going to be really simple and the same. It's just in practice, it can be harder for others. And then you get into the idea of some people are naturally savers and some people are naturally spenders. And so then you can fine tune that, because someone might actually struggle a lot with spending money. And kind of the quick rule of thumb, Harvard has a really cool survey you can do to see if you're a saver or a spender. But their quick TLDR is, if you get buyer's remorse on a handful of purchases a month, you're probably a saver, or at least you want to be a saver. Your brain is telling you should be. And if you don't get buyer's remorse very often, then you're either really good at making purchases or you're more naturally a spender. And that doesn't mean in practice that's what people do. It just means where you are more likely to fall into that category. And so then we look at that. We say, okay, are you naturally a saver? Cool. Saving is going to be actually pretty easy in these practices. And we might actually want to put things in place like reward systems for when you hit savings goals, that you actually have to spend money on yourself so that you can keep this momentum. And if you're naturally a spender, which a lot of people are,
would you say you see more of that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, and not just here, or not just in Spokane or with Canopy, but Harvard's, when they released their survey, they found too that the majority of people are naturally spenders, because we live in a day and age where marketing's in your face every hour of every day. And companies are really good about creating ads specifically for you, or hey, we heard your Alexa, overheard this really awesome thing about this
Alexa heard
thing you want. Look, it just happened to pop up an ad for you. And so I think that our culture also just shifts towards spending more too. And social media significantly influences people's want to spend. And those without social media in life, there's lots of interesting studies about they spend less money too. And so all those factors go into it. But from that 30,000 foot level, long story long, to answer your question, it's going to be a pretty similar formula for the person that wants to not stress when they get to the checkout line to get their second house.
Yeah. That all makes sense.
Yeah.
How do you decide which topics to cover when you go into different places and whatnot too? Do you let people lead and, based on what you're hearing from them, or do you go in with decisions made before you start a presentation?
I typically start with the same topic, which is just an overview of budgeting. And there's like 5 slides in the whole hour, but it's very conversational based. Mm. And from that, I just take notes throughout. Certainly if it's going to be a group that we're back with, or it's going to be some kind of repetition and cadence with them. And why I like starting with just like overarching basic budgeting is a lot of things come from budgeting, right? A lot of the whys come out. And so people will start talking about either, I want, to figure out how to pay for college education, or I want to figure out how to buy my first house, or I want to figure out how to pay off all my credit cards. That's why I'm budgeting. Or if X, and Y. And so people's whys come out a lot in that conversation. And then I can really hone in on, okay, this is what the next topic should be, because several people were really concerned about having debt. And so let's have what maybe debt consolidation looks like, or how to pay off our debt faster, or all the different ways to pay off debt. Because we, in the news all the time, hear about like snowballing your debt, or avalanching your debt, or the Dave Ramsey way, or the Warren Buffett way. And so then just talking about never leading someone to like, this is the best way, because again, everyone's going to be different. But here's several ways. And so let's find the glove that fits best for you, because it's not one size fits all. But there's a lot of roads that lead to the same outcome.
Yeah. I really, if I may compliment you, really appreciated in our last financial literacy, we all sat down and there were so many different questions, from I want to figure out how to invest to I want to figure out, like you'd said, how to pay off my credit card. And they were coming from a lot of different angles and a lot of different lived experiences, and you took it and you really did like address them all and run with it. And I really appreciated it. And I think my favorite part of taking financial literacy was the open conversation and hearing everyone's questions. And not only that, but like having a space where people felt comfortable asking the questions. If I remember correctly, you really started with like talking about why it's okay to talk about finances, right? There's this taboo about like, don't talk about it, like not in front of my friends, like, and you just created this space where it was like, okay, let's just talk about it. No one's here to judge. No one's, going to think of you differently after this. And let's just open it up and learn from each other. And I think that's what we really did. And I was impressed. And each time I've stepped into a financial literacy, I've learned something. I mean, I've only done 2 so far, but I get excited when they come in, know.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
It is a really fun kind of energy that can get in the room. Like you hear, we're doing financial literacy tonight, and people are like, boo.
It's hard to get people to show up.
I promise it's not like math class. But it is like very energizing, because when you get time dedicated to talk about something that you normally don't get the chance to talk about, oftentimes it can be really engaging and energizing, because it's like, I have all of these things I want to say that I didn't realize I actually wanted to talk about. When did you, if I can ask too, because going off of something you said about finances being kind of a taboo topic, did you talk about them in your household growing up? Or if not, when did that kind of become a conversation for you?
No, it was really shut down in my household. It was really like I didn't grow up wealthy at all. We definitely struggled with food for the first part of our life, but then the transition, like I didn't notice it, and the transition kind of like happened. And I remember moving kind of to like more of a middle class house and like neighborhood, but then there was no conversation about the transition. Like it didn't happen until I was older that I was like, it was different. Like I remember it got different, and it wasn't that it was ever like bad, but I remember thinking like, oh, that's very strange. What happened? Like what happened behind the scenes? Was there like successes in, my parents' jobs or careers or anything like that? But yeah, we really didn't have conversations. I was taught very early on to work for what I have. And work hard, it was like mow this huge lawn and you get $7.
That's right.
And like spend the $7 wisely. So it was like very much like work for your own, but that was my lesson around money, I think. And then to spend sparingly, I think was another one.
It's gone.
Yeah.
When did finances become normalized for you? Was it in college or?
I think when I met my current partner,
nice.
I think we have done a really good job of being really open about it. We both came from backgrounds where it wasn't really necessarily discussed, but we were aware that there was like some struggle. And so, I think we talked about it, and we both lived in a way that was very like, are we going to make it? And then we were like, okay, we are though. So what does that look like? And really just not knowing. Yeah. So we started the conversation out of a place of like not knowing.
Learning together.
Yeah. That's what does it look like when you are, doing okay and buying your groceries?
Yeah. I think that's so common too, where that's like the main time when people start talking about finances is with either their partner or when they are in that essentially adult phase of their life where they saw their parents in. Mm-hmm. And so that's our goal, is to, one, provide that education for folks in that stage of life, but also then to try to start increasing that prior. And so when someone turns 18 or 19 or 20, they're not learning and taking baby steps. They're hitting the ground running. Mm-hmm. And then certainly, hopefully not starting one leg down. Like if you're 18, you're going to get 12 credit card advertisements all of a sudden, which can be detrimental to you if you're trying to then buy a car at 20, because maybe you didn't handle those in a way where it provided benefit to your credit score, or you didn't even know what a credit score was. And now you're like, okay, now I'm being told I can't even buy a car and I have to get to work. So what do I do? And then payday lending can become a big trap for folks in that situation. And so we teach a class to parents with young kiddos once a month. And an activity we do is, if they have the ability, we encourage them to take like $50 or $100, young kiddos, high schoolers, and have their child plan a date out with them and the parent.
You're talking about this. Yeah. I love this idea.
And we've gotten such good feedback from that, where it's, because it does a couple of things. One, it does show the kid how expensive things are, especially for more than just one. So if you're taking, if I'm 14 and now my parents gave me $100 and said, plan a cool night out for us. And I'm like, cool. I want to go see a new movie, and 3 movie tickets now are like $60. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, oh, I can't do a movie and a dinner, so I guess we're going to McDonald's after, or Taco Bell. And even that can be $40 now for the 3 people. And so it does build a lot of empathy and understanding from the kid, because then they're realizing how expensive things are, especially when you're adding more than just one to the equation. Mm-hmm. And it's also a cool learning opportunity. And then the parents can have a dialogue after, or parent can have a dialogue after, and debrief what they and the kid learned. And then it just offers more understanding going forward, and why a guardian or parent may say no when the kid asks for something. Not always empathy and understanding, but a little more perhaps. So
it definitely opens a dialogue. Yeah, I really appreciate that. That's very neat.
Thank you.
What a cool skill.
Yeah, it's been a fun one to track and see the different conversations that have taken place.
Yeah. Back a couple topics, I guess now, but what do you say to people that don't want to go to financial literacy because it's, intimidating, or not for me, or whatever? How do you get people to come listen to this, right? That's such a valuable thing that you just shared. That seems so simple, that makes financial literacy very approachable.
Yeah.
How do you get people into the space, or what do you tell them?
It depends how much time I have with them.
That's valid.
For a lot of folks too, I will say, I don't want to either.
Yeah.
And if I have 3 minutes with them, then I'll tell them just a bit of my background. And I worked in social work for several years before this, and had zero financial background. And I grew up in a household that didn't have very much income or or money. And though I didn't know that as a kid, as I became a teen, you start to kind of understand those ideas. And so I will be the first to say, like, yeah, financial literacy sounds horrible. And it wasn't until I went back to school and got my MBA where I was able to kind of apply what I had learned in social work and in my psych degrees with the MBA. And like, there's a really realistic approach you can take to financial literacy that doesn't have to overcomplicate things, because when you listen to maybe like the main financial influencers in today, they sell books, right? Because they take a concept and then they can stretch it out really long, which for some people, that's a great way to learn. For me, I'm like, I don't want to talk about finances for that long. Like it, and I heard a great quote a couple years ago, and it was, the longer it takes you to explain something, the less you know about it. And so if you can't be short and sweet, you probably aren't as informed as you think on it. And so it's like, cool, let's take these financial topics and make them really simple. If someone wants to dive deeper into it, we can, but let's make it short and sweet and have fun during it. And also not waste people's time, because that's the most valuable thing, right? We're, especially post-pandemic, I think time has become so precious and so limited. Everyone is busy. Everyone is hustling. Everyone is trying to spend time with their family and fulfill their hobbies and their wishes and find balance and go to work. And the last thing I want to do is waste someone's time. And so if I can say that to someone, it might spark their interest enough to be like, I'll see if this guy's worth it. And I'll be like, let's talk for 15 minutes about any financial topic you want. I might not know the answers, but we can learn together, or I can shed a little bit of light. And then the big thing is just not overcomplicating it, because when people feel stressed or anxious about something, they're not going to learn, right? Like when we're stressed, or at least I tend to shut down or really just zone in on one or two things instead of being able to be a sponge. And so it's like, cool, let's have a fun, open dialogue. And again, like we mentioned earlier, a lot of people find when they get the chance to talk about money and stress or success that they don't normally get to share with their colleagues or peers. They find that they have some shared experiences they may have not known about, which can have some cool bonding. And two, they find that it's fun to talk about. And it's important to talk about, because that's how we learn about it.
Yeah, I really like that approach.
Thank you.
Are there other credit unions or banks that you know of that do financial literacy, or is this something that Canopy's really leading?
Yeah, there are, certainly. And I think that credit unions in particular try to take that on as a really important initiative to them. There's not as many in our community as I would like to see, because I love what Canopy does and I wish we could replicate it all over. But we can't, right? And so the more of us doing this, the better our community is, right? If we had 12 of these podcasts going on from different FIs or financial institutions, that's 12 times the people getting this information, which is makes our community better. So there's not as much as we would like. And where Canopy is unique in that is we're a certified CDFI, which is Community Development Financial Institution. And we're the only deposit-taking one in Spokane. And so what a CDFI essentially means from the 30,000 foot level is you're held to a higher standard to do more community impact work and work with folks that are typically historically turned away by other financial institutions. Because there's several financial institutions in town that if you don't have a 640 credit score, which is a fair credit score, you can't even open up a savings account, which has nothing to do with credit, but they just won't even let you. And so and the average credit score in our community is like 660. So a bunch of people fall below that, which means when they're turned away, a couple of things happen. One, if I'm turned away, I'll probably, let's say I go to try to buy a car and I'm turned away, I'll probably just associate most dealerships with turning me away. I'm like, okay, they said no, so I'm guessing most will tell me no. I don't want to go through that again, whether it was embarrassment or frustration or anger. I don't want to experience that again. So I'm just not going to do that. And then I hear something on the radio, typically from a payday lender, where it's like, we'll approve you, no credit needed. And I'm like, cool. Now I at least know I don't have to feel that feeling that came with being told no, or I'm not good enough. And so I'll just go here, even if it costs more money, which then can just fall into either continuing this generational poverty or starting it, because payday lending is a really horrible cycle to break out of. You can get as high as like a 700% interest rate on $1,000. And they fully well know that they're not ever going to probably get all of the payments out of someone, but they're going to get well more than enough to pay the $1,000 back plus whatever time it took. And that's kind of our goal, is to just kick their butts and say like, hey, there's a really cool resource in your community that won't turn you away based off of your credit score or your financial journey or whatever you didn't know, right? Because sometimes you just don't know how to handle money. Or on the opposite side, sometimes you do know how to handle your money, but you don't have the financial capability to handle it that way, right? If you're deciding between, I've got $300 left and I can either pay off my rent or I can pay my credit card. Well, I need a place to stay, so I'm going to pay off my rent. And I know I should pay my credit card, but I don't have the financial ability to. And those people don't deserve to get turned away by financial institutions.
I wish I would have known about it sooner. I hate that I even feel embarrassed to share it, but I went to, thank you. I went to like purchase our home and I was so confident that I had a credit score. Yeah. So confident. I was like, I definitely have a really good credit score. For sure. But I never had conversations about finance or financial literacy, anything along those lines. And I had like paid off my college debt as I went and like did all these things to make sure I never had negative.
Yeah.
I never had negative. Come to find out, because I had never had negative, I had no credit.
Yeah.
Because I worked so hard to never go into the negatives they were like, no, you don't exist. And I was like, no, it's not possible. I've been so responsible.
Look at this report card.
So responsible. And they had to paint this huge picture about how I was like a big fan of Dave Ramsey and write this big letter and propose this idea that I in fact was financially responsible.
Borrower. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was so interesting because I went in fully confident. Yeah. And I
this will take an hour.
So stupid.
Yeah. It's so true though, because you think you're doing everything right and you're right. Mm-hmm. And the tricky part with credit scores is they change all the time on what's counted for and what's not. One of the big things is having a credit card and using it wisely. And there's a lot of misconception to what that looks like. But for a lot of people, having a credit card is just a no-go, right? They're like, I don't want the temptation, or I've been told by my family or friends or colleagues or peers that they're really bad to have, so I'm not going to open one. Yeah. And your credit score is going to be lower by like 100 plus points just for not having one open in your name. And that's detrimental just for not having one. That system is set up for penalizing you by hundreds of points. But then, you go overseas to Australia and it's like a whole interview process about why do you need a credit card? Like, why don't you have the cash to pay for this?
It's such a system to learn.
It's so confusing for folks that are either born here and live here like you and me, or are moving here because they're like, why would we want a credit card?
Yeah, this seems like
but it's built on having one and then really not using it often. It's like that misconception of some people say like, oh, you need to use it every month, or you need to keep a balance on it, or you need to use it a bunch. It's like, no, the best thing you can do is keep it, certainly below 10% of its utilization or available limit, and as close to zero as possible. And if you don't use it every month, good job.
Perfect. Very cool. Well, I guess my last question for you today is, why are you partnering with NEYFS in like kind of furthering the knowledge of financial literacy?
Several reasons. I mean, one, I think that the work and impact and just the way you show up in your community is very authentic and genuine, and you see that the mission you state is so believed by every person that comes through this door, and which is an infectious feeling to get behind. There's, I think, a lot of energy that comes from that, and it's energy that makes you believe that we can make a change in our community, and that can be through small conversations, providing education on financial literacy or housing or resources in your community that might be free, or just a fun night for the family, right? It's a, not to sound cheesy, but it can be like a beacon of hope for someone in this community, which is a very powerful feeling. And that's how we try to show up. So we try to align ourselves with organizations that back up what they say they're going to do. And because a lot of the families that we work with don't have time for us to not follow through, right? And if we say we're going to do something, then we're going to do it. And I think that's what you guys are all about. Is I've been to several of your events, and I hear nothing but awesome things from your participants about the way you show up in your community, and two, the way that they're able to show up with you. They can show up as their authentic selves. They don't have to put a face on or a mask on, and they can just be them as an individual and come here, which is a really powerful thing, because I think that's not true for not only a lot of organizations in our community, but just across the U.S., where it's sometimes you do feel like you have to fit into a box to get resources from a certain organization, or to get what you hope to out of that. And here I feel like people are able to be themselves, which is powerful.
Yeah, I love hearing that from just an outside perspective. I'm very grateful for the team here at NEYFS and all that we do. I think it's so awesome. Cool. We love working with Canopy too. Like, you guys show up like very consistently, and we learn something from you every single time. And like you said, I really think like what we do aligns. So
thank you. I appreciate
I'm excited to offer this in a new medium, right? In this new form, and see kind of where it can go, and bring in different voices and have different conversations. I think it'll be really cool.
No, I'm stoked. I think this is going to be just a fun way to learn more for all of us, and cool to bring different voices in from the community with their questions or concerns or topics and tackle them together.
Definitely.